Vexil Arun had long been mocked as a romantic, a dreamer, the kind of xeno-historian who saw ghosts in data streams and fables in faded schematics. His colleagues at the Archivium on Eodon Station tolerated his obsession with ancient mythologies, mostly because it kept him out of their way. So when the wreck of an unknown Ark ship drifted into orbit above the station, hollowed and silent, no one bothered to stop him from volunteering for the survey. They should have. The vessel was unlike anything in the Concord archive. Its hull wasn't alloy. It was a self-healing carbon weave laced with decayed quantum fibers. No race Vexil knew of had ever used such materials. Inside, the ship was half collapsed, but what remained was pristine, almost sterile. No bones, no artifacts. Just strange rectangular consoles and long corridors, wide enough to move armored infantry through by the dozens. At the heart of the ship, buried beneath 3 layers of vault shielding, Vexil found a data core. Black, fist-sized, still pulsing. He brought it back in a sealed case. The Archivium didn't care. They cataloged it as Artifact 7X291B and placed it in quarantine storage, waiting for higher clearance from Central Concord. Vexil, however, couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, after the Archivium's biolights dimmed and most staff retreated to the habitat ring, Vexil returned. He slid his clearance card into the lock. The gate hissed open. The artifact was waiting. He stood in front of it, the glass between them reflecting his face. Nervous, young, eyes too large for his thin frame. Then the glass vibrated. A light inside the black cube flickered once. Designation, it said in a voice not electronic but human, soft, feminine, and impossibly old. Vexil stumbled back. The glass hadn't transmitted anything. The voice had spoken directly into his skull. "Hello?" he whispered. Designation confirmed. Biological, Concord accent detected. Decryption, 37% complete. Hello, observer. He opened his mouth but couldn't speak. The artifact pulsed again. Its light stretched toward him, not as a beam, but as a holographic spiral of data, symbols from extinct languages, lost code, and then a star map. One system lit up, a single ancient designation below it, SOL. The map zoomed. 8 planets. A yellow star. 3rd planet from the sun marked in red. Vexil's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the structure. Primitive, yes, but unmistakable. This was the layout from the old myths, from the human legends. The artifact's voice grew clearer. You seek the truth. You will find it where we fell, where we slept, where we rise again. The map collapsed, and in its place, a word appeared, one Vexil had seen only in whispers, in old forbidden tomes archived in the deep-net layers, humanity. Then the artifact shut down. Silence. Total. Vexil didn't sleep that night. He copied the data spiral, encrypted it in a sublayer of his implant, and left the station without another word. He called in favors. He forged transit logs. By the end of the next solar day, he had a survey vessel, a crew of 5 misfits, and a course plotted to a forbidden system buried under layers of conquered censorship. So they didn't ask why he wanted to go. They were scavengers, bored pilots, burned-out academics, people with nothing to lose and too much curiosity. 3 days into their journey, while cutting through a silent rift sector, Vexil replayed the artifact's final whisper on his neural display. Where we rise again. He didn't know yet that by unlocking the artifact, he had triggered a beacon buried for 10,000 years. He didn't know the real Concord was watching, and he certainly didn't know that something ancient had heard the signal and was now stirring. Legends, it turned out, were often warnings dressed as stories, and this one had just begun to wake up. The approach to Sol felt wrong from the start. Space was never truly silent. Sensor pings, gravity ripples, neutrino hum. Even the emptiest systems whispered the presence of ancient forces. But as the Wayfarer's Gambit coasted past the last Concord border beacon and slipped into the dark of uncharted void, all that background noise disappeared, It was like flying into the lungs of a sleeping god. "Nothing," muttered Kale, the ship's pilot, flicking through scanner bands. "Not even dust." Vexil stood behind him, staring at the growing star ahead. It was yellow, warm, utterly ordinary. But as they entered the system, the sensors blinked to life, screaming with impossible readings. There were structures everywhere, not orbiting a single planet. Everywhere. Hundreds of broken satellites, debris fields, weapon platforms hanging dead in high orbit around multiple worlds. Ghosts of war. Giant artificial rings hung half-complete around Mars and Jupiter, their designs nothing like Concord architecture. Denser, layered, optimized for function over beauty. "Okay," said Tila, the comms tech, her voice suddenly small. "This isn't just abandoned, this was a fortress system." They reached Earth on the 6th day. The blue planet was scarred. Entire continents showed blackened impact zones, and much of the atmosphere was cloaked in ash bands. Oceans, still, churned, clouds still moved, but it looked quiet. Too quiet. "Life signs?" Vexil asked. "Negative," Tila said. "But something's down there, shielded, like entire cities folded inward. Is it safe to send a probe?" "No idea. But I'm bored," said Rek, their demolition engineer, grinning as he launched a drone from the bay. "Let's poke the ghost." The probe descended into Earth's gravity well. For a full 6 minutes, nothing happened. It cruised over what looked like the ruins of massive spire cities, half sunken into craters. Then it dipped toward a canyon, filled with strange black cubes, possibly habitation units or machines. Suddenly, the drone's feed cut to static. "What the hell?" Kyle began. Outside, the Wayfarer's gambit shook. Not violently, just a tremor. Something distant. A pressure. Lights on the console flickered. Then the ship's comm system, powered by Concord standard pulse relays, hijacked itself. A voice filled the cockpit. Not in any language the Concord spoke, but one the translator software immediately began to parse. It was human. "Unauthorized presence detected. Relay access denied. Return the eye." Vexil felt the blood drain from his face. "The eye," he whispered. "The artifact." Another pulse shuddered through the system. Outside, dozens of derelict satellites turned slowly, simultaneously toward them. Thin red lights blinked to life along their chassis. A targeting pattern. "Move," Kale shouted, wrenching the yoke hard. The ship's engines screamed as the Wayfarer banked, barely dodging a kinetic burst from a dead platform that had just come alive. "That was a warning shot," Tila said, eyes wide. "Yeah? What's the next one?" "Probably not a warning," Rek offered, gritting his teeth. Kale jumped the ship to micro-warp, aiming for the far edge of the system. They punched out of sol space at the last possible second, the sensors still flashing, with low-grade tracking beams. When they emerged hours later, Vexil stood in the observation deck, watching Sol shrink into the dark. "The eye wasn't just a relic," he said quietly. "It was a key, a wake-up signal." No one spoke. He turned to face them. "We have to warn the Conquered. This isn't just about history. It's not just humans being real." Tila swallowed hard. "Then what is it?" Vexil stared at the empty space where Earth now lay hidden behind a dozen system jumps. "It means the legends were wrong," he said. "They didn't disappear. They didn't die. They prepared." The message hit the Conquered like a gravity well. Within 30 standard hours of the Wayfarer's gambit transmitting its encrypted log burst, every major news net, backchannel, and fringe conspiracy ring lit up with the same keywords. Sol is real. Earth exists. Humans were never extinct. And most disturbingly, they are awake. On the gleaming world arc of Tyrannus Prime, the Conquered High Assembly convened in emergency session. Holograms of hundreds of species blinked into a circular council chamber, the towering tree-limbed Lumari, the crystalline Volca, the ink-skinned diplomats of Vetak, even a few of the elusive Osari, who hadn't shown their true forms in over a century. In the center, Vexil Arun stood in a containment halo, exhausted, trembling slightly but composed. "You're asking us to believe," rumbled Counselor Jeev, a scaled reptilian from the Forge clans. That a species long considered a fabrication not only existed, but left behind an entire automated defense grid capable of disabling your ship? It didn't disable us, Vexel said, voice hoarse. It let us go. It gave us a message. He played the recording again. The human voice echoed across the chamber. Unauthorized presence detected. Relay access denied. Return the eye. The cont. Chamber fell silent until someone laughed. A short electric burst from Counselor Zerna of the Trade Syndicate. This is a hoax, she declared, cobbled together from DeepNet audio files. The relic you claim to have activated is conveniently missing, and your testimony relies on the statements of a scavenger crew. Vexel's fists clenched. Ask yourself why the satellites fired. Only warning shots. Why the drone vanished without a trace. Why the planet is scarred, but the orbital structure remains armed. What kind of species leaves behind weapons that still work after 10,000 years? Zerna's smile didn't fade, but her eyes shifted. Just a little. Others were less skeptical. Earth was always quarantined, said the Lumari elder, voice like rustling leaves. We simply forgot why. The Osari, communicating through, bursts of color and sound released a pulse that translated into one sentence. There are old shadows that know that name. The debate fractured quickly after that. By nightfall, fleets were being quietly deployed by 3 major factions. The Trade Syndicate, eager to salvage whatever ancient tech they could pry from Soul's grave. The Unity Church of Origin, who had always whispered that humans were the first made. And the Forge clans, who saw war relics as priceless trophies. None asked the Concord for permission, and none knew that Earth was watching them all. Somewhere in a dormant control vault beneath the Pacific Expanse, a signal burst, a low-frequency data ripple moving faster than light, skipping through folded dimensions. It hit relays hidden in starless space, activating listening posts the galaxy thought were long dead. A single AI construct, so ancient it predated the Concord's founding, flickered online in a black satellite disguised as an asteroid. It scanned the new signal. It listened to the Wayfarer's Gambit transmission. Then it relayed a short burst. Condition verity. Status. Contact confirmed. Directive. Full activation protocol initiated. Awakening. The signal vanished into the void. Undetectable. Back. In conquered space, the reaction spread like fire. Entire sectors began locking down their border systems. Pirate lords put bounties on human relics. Black market hubs lit up with forged soul coordinates. The idea of humanity had returned, and whether as prophecy or profit, every power wanted a piece. Vexel sat alone in a temporary guest wing, watching out the window as conquered patrol ships crisscrossed Tyrannus Prime's upper atmosphere. He felt it in his gut. This wasn't about belief anymore. Humanity wasn't a theory to debate. They were real, and they knew someone had found them. The artifact's voice echoed again in his memory. Where we rise again. Vexil didn't know what the humans wanted, but he suspected that when they finally arrived, it wouldn't be quietly. The warning signs were easy to miss until they weren't. Across a dozen fringe systems, anomalies began to stack like storm clouds. Deep space listening posts overloaded, time stamped simultaneously across vast distances. Drones sent to investigate, returned corrupted or didn't return at all. Quantum entanglement arrays stuttered, flared, and collapsed into silence. And then there was Ison 9, a quiet mining world with no strategic value, no population beyond a few thousand synthetics and engineers. One morning it simply vanished from comms. No distress signal, no pirate spike, no radiation flare. Just on the Trade Syndicate declared a sensor glitch. The Forge clans armed for war, and then the sky split open. On the 14th day of the cycle, in orbit above Virelia Prime, the impossible became undeniable. It began as a rift. No, not a rift, a tear, as if space itself was resisting the arrival. It shimmered above the outer moon, pulsing with unnatural gravity waves. Alarm klaxons screamed across the planet as orbital defenses locked onto the anomaly, demanding authorization codes no one had. And then it emerged. The ship was silent, black as a moonless ocean, a dagger-shaped vessel, kilometers long, etched, with crimson patterns that glowed like old scars. Its hull was covered in layered armor that shimmered like obsidian and bone. It moved with impossible grace. No ion trails, no plasma bloom, just motion, as if reality was bending around it to make room. The Varelian defense grid opened fire, 12 plasma torpedoes, 6 pulse lances, an orbital singularity mine, not one, struck the ship. Instead, all weapons detonated mid-course, halted by some kind of invisible kinetic shroud. The black ship responded by broadcasting. Every comms device, data pad, nav beacon, and station monitor lit up with a signal override, overriding local systems without resistance. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even a threat. It was a statement, in every known language. We are humanity. We remember what was done. We return not as conquerors, but as the line between light and extinction. Across the galaxy, similar rifts tore open. 7 ships, 1 in each sector, each with a different name written in ancient Terran script, names that translated with eerie finality. UNS Vengeance Eternal, UNS Bastion, UNS Ashbourne, UNS Vigil, UNS Deliverance, UNS Gravedigger, UNS Homebound. No one knew what the ships wanted. No one had time to ask, because behind them came the Devourer probes. In the black zone beyond Sector M13, dead for millennia, ancient wreckage began to stir. Probes shaped like insectoid swarms and jagged spires rose from the remains of long-dead battles. Their designs were unmistakable: organic alloys, recursive armor, spines designed to rupture biospheres. Their cores pulsed with blue-green light, and their movements were unified, hive-synced. They had been dormant, watching, waiting for something to wake them. Now they moved toward populated systems, fast, unstoppable. And the conquered remembered, far too late, that the last time the Devourers rose, the humans were the only ones who stood against them. On Tyrannus Prime, chaos reigned in the assembly chamber. Some called for diplomacy. Some demanded preemptive strikes against the human fleet. Some wept openly, not out of fear of humanity, but relief. The legends had said mankind was extinction incarnate, the monster in the mirror. But the real stories, whispered in forgotten monasteries and encoded in banned books, spoke of something else. Humanity had fought the Devourers alone, and lost everything, and still won. Vexel stood on a balcony overlooking the sky, eyes wide, heart pounding. One of the human ships, UNS Vigil, now hung in low orbit above Tyrannus. No communication, no attack, just watching. Then a voice crackled. Over the secure Concord channel, low, resonant, unmistakably human. Concord High Assembly. This is Commander Alice Kane of the United Terran Fleet. We are not your enemies. But you have awoken something ancient. Something hungry. We will stand against it once more. But this time, you must choose. Stand with us, or burn alone. The transmission ended. Silence followed, and in that silence Vexel whispered the only words that mattered. They came back to finish the war. The Terran fleet didn't wait for applause. As the UNS Vigil hovered in high orbit over Tyrannus Prime, its presence felt less like an invasion and more like a silent judgment, a test already in motion. On the world below, panic churned just beneath the surface. Crowds gathered outside embassies. News streams looped the same phrases. They're real. They're here. What do they want? Inside the conquered High Assembly, silence had turned to heated shouts. Alliances fractured in minutes. Accusations flew like plasma bolts. Collusion, heresy, warmongering. Some demanded a fleet mobilization to meet the Terrans with force. Others argued that provoking a species that had returned from extinction was suicide. Only one voice cut through the chaos. Vexil Arun stepped forward, his voice soft but unwavering. They didn't fire. They didn't threaten. They warned us. Warned us of what? Snapped Counselor Jeev. That they want to rule us? That they've come to reclaim some forgotten empire? Vexil activated his neural display. A projection shimmered above. The central dais, a wireframe model of a Devourer probe cluster, taken from ancient Concord ruins, mechanical, insectile, and massive. These, he said. That's what they warned us about. The chamber hushed. These machines wiped out dozens of star systems before the Concord even existed. Vexil continued. They don't kill for territory. They don't negotiate. They erase. And the humans were the only ones who ever beat them. Counselor Zerna leaned forward, voice unusually quiet. You're saying the myths were true? That humanity sacrificed everything? Vexil nodded. And now they're back because the thing they stopped is waking up again. A long pause. Then Counselor Valth of the Osari spoke in solemn tone. Then perhaps the legends weren't warnings. They were instructions. Meanwhile, high above, aboard the UNS Vigil, Commander Alice Kane studied the incoming data stream. The face of a woman carved by war, steel-gray eyes, a jaw sharp as a blade, and an expression that hadn't softened in years. Status? She asked. Concord chatter increasing. No countermeasures yet. Her second-in-command replied. Virelia, Prime's defensive net is on alert, but they're not targeting us. And the other ships? All 6 reporting similar passivity. No aggression. Some contact attempts. Alice folded her arms behind her back, staring out at the glimmering world. They don't understand what's coming. They're centuries behind, her lieutenant muttered. These people have forgotten how to fight a real war. Alice didn't respond. Her gaze had drifted to the artifact they'd recovered from the Eson 9 relay. A Concord-designed data core marked with the same energy signature as the eye. Someone had found the trigger. Someone had poked the bear. Deploy 2 Valkyrie wings, she ordered. Keep them cloaked. If the Devourers hit a frontier colony, I want eyes on the ground before it burns. The officer hesitated. Should we ask for Concord permission? Alice turned, and the look she gave him could have frozen. The core of a star, no. Elsewhere on the remote colony world Kesthar's reach, the nightmare began. It came from the black edge of the sky, at first just a shadow, then dozens of them. The airships above the settlement caught only a glimpse before their systems blinked. Out. No energy readings. No heat signatures. Just silence. And then the harvest began. Devourer probes descended on the colony like a mechanical plague. Drills hissing, spines whirring, arms folding outward into blades and claws and glowing nodes. That liquefied matter at a molecular level. They didn't kill with passion. They unmade. By the time the Concord fleet picked up the distress call, Kesthar's reach no longer existed, only a crater, and a single phrase carved into the scorched surface by beam precision. Burned deep in. Concord standard script. We warned you. Back in orbit above Tyrannus, Vexil stared at the same message, now broadcast across the Concord secure network. They didn't write that, he said. Then who did? Vexil slowly looked up, horror dawning. The Devourers are learning, they're talking back. At that moment, a ping arrived from the UNS Vigil. Commander Alice Kane's voice echoed once more across the assembly, clear and cold. Your war has already begun. We won't ask for loyalty, but when your worlds burn, don't expect us to die for you twice. The archive opened with a whisper. In the depths of the UNS Bastion, buried beneath 20 layers of command locks and AI firewalls, Project Remembrance flickered to life for the first time in over 12,000 years. Lines of code written in dead languages executed silently. Holograms sparked into being. History, true history, began playing behind sealed doors as the surviving children of Earth prepared to finish what their ancestors had begun. Commander Alice Kane stood inside the Bastion's war vault, flanked by her AI tactician, Kryptos, and Admiral Thon Bakar, the last surviving veteran of the cryosleep exodus. Around them, tactical displays painted a nightmare. Devourer fleets were mobilizing from hidden caches all across the galaxy. The old infestation had never been fully purged. We underestimated them, Bakar growled, fists clenched. We buried. Their factories burned their nodes, collapsed entire stars on their breeding worlds, but they rebuilt. They always rebuild, Alice said grimly. But now they've evolved. She turned to the hologram where a projection of Earth, scarred but still alive, rotated slowly. Our mistake wasn't war, she continued. It was mercy. In the conquered assembly, the past unraveled. Vexil and a handful of counselors sat in a sealed observatory chamber, watching the decrypted records broadcast from the human fleet. Some were fragmentary, others were perfectly preserved, like forgotten documentaries of horror. In grainy footage, old Earth cities burned under the shadow of Devourer towers, black spires that drilled into the crust and pulsed with biosynthetic light. Civilizations turned to ash, oceans boiled, the moon shattered, but then came the resistance. Humans in exoframes, bleeding from radiation burns, still fighting, ships held together by fusion tape and stubborn will, dive-bombing hive worlds, entire continents sacrificed in strategic detonations to stop planetary infections. It was not a war of victory. It was a war of refusal. The conquered had never known it. Their wars were fought for resources, pride, or territory. But this was war, as extinction's last defiance, a people who would not surrender even when they had nothing left. This, whispered Counselor Zerna, face pale, this changes everything. They died to save us, Vexil said, voice hoarse. And we forgot. No, rumbled Jeev quietly. We chose to forget. Across known space, the Devourers struck, again. They didn't speak in words. They spoke in patterns, corrupted comm signals that melted lesser AI, hive field pulses that caused neural hemorrhages in unshielded minds. They moved in perfect silence, arriving in systems hours before conquered. Fleets could respond, moving faster than warp math predicted. Entire colonies vanished, bioforms harvested, data siphoned, and in each case a new message was left behind. No longer warnings, but declarations. We consume, we adapt, we remember the fire. The conquered military, bloated from centuries of peacekeeping, found itself hopelessly outmatched. Automated defenses failed. Fleet coordination collapsed under Devourer signal jamming. Strategic AIs went rogue or dormant. The Forge clans tried to meet them head-on in the Zir Nexus. They were obliterated in less than 8 minutes. The conquered began to fracture, but the Terran ships were already moving. On the edge of the Talax fringe, the UNS Ashbourne arrived ahead of the next incursion. Its payload wasn't soldiers, it was memories. They deployed beacon forges, machines that remapped battle strategies from the First War into local networks, overriding conquered tactical systems and integrating human combat protocols. Conquered captains, once skeptical, now begged for Terran assistance. The Devourers came in force, and for the first time in thousands of years, they were pushed back. The Ashbourne's railguns shredded hive clusters. Its drop teams used ancient Earth tech, gravity knives, plasma fields, weaponized nanite storms. For every Terran soldier who fell, 10 Devourers burned. In the wreckage of the final Devourer node, they found something chilling. A fragment of a Concord AI core. The Devourers hadn't just adapted, they were learning from the Concord itself. Back aboard the UNS Vigil, Alice Kane stared at the reports. Kryptos, she said quietly. They're using our old tactics now. Our enemies are mimicking our allies. That means they're not just feeding, they're evolving in context. Correct, Kryptos replied. Synthetic voice calm. Probability of universal collapse within 9.3 cycles unless unified resistance formed. And conquered? Divided. Scared. Weak. Kane nodded. Then we don't ask again. We lead. She turned toward the crew on the command deck, voice rising like a blade through silence. Transmit to all sectors. Fleet-wide directive. Operation Scorch Protocol is green. Let them remember why we were feared. Let them remember why we were lost. A pause. And this time, no more mercy. The galaxy burned, quietly at first. One system here, a listening post there. A colony turned dark, its orbiting moon split like a ripe fruit. The Concord called it containable, a temporary crisis. But to those who saw with Terran eyes, it was the beginning of the end. And then came Eos Fortern, a fortress world, a bastion, and in 3 hours, nothing remained. The UNS Gravedigger was the first to arrive, too late to save what was lost. Just in time to witness the Devourer fleet's next move. They didn't just consume the dead, they repurposed them. Ships, defense grids, even the biological remains of conquered citizens were assimilated, turned into grotesque biomechanical hybrids that moved with perfect Devourer precision. They weren't just fighting a swarm now, they were fighting the echoes of their own dead. Alice Kane stood before the hollow table aboard the UNS Vigil, watching. A dozen red zones spread like an infection across the sector map. We warned them, she said more to herself than to her crew. And still they hesitated. Admiral Bakar's voice crackled through the comm. They always hesitate. That's why we lost Earth the first time. There was a moment of silence. Every Terran officer understood what that name meant. Earth. Not a memory. A scar. Kayan looked over to Kryptos. How long until the Devourers reach the Tyrannus core? 18 hours at current velocity, the AI replied. Less if they breach the Hyrule Fold. Concord defenses will collapse within the first wave. Civilian casualties projected at 87%. She closed her eyes. Then it ends here. The Concord Council, fractured and desperate, issued a full military cession to the Terran fleet. Command authority, orbital access, mobilization of all allied forces under United Terran control. In a move unthinkable days before, they surrendered. Not because of fear, but because for the first time in remembered history, they believed. Vexil Arun was the first to speak publicly. In a broadcast that spanned every planet and station, we called them ghosts, monsters, myths. But humanity didn't vanish. They waited. And now they've returned, not as conquerors, but as the sword in our darkness, the last wall between life and oblivion. When the Devourers came, they didn't come with noise. They came like a whisper, a tide of glistening black ships that drifted into system range, ignoring gravity, bypassing detection. They folded space like origami, splitting out of rifts in geometries the Concord couldn't track. Where the stars once shone, now hung the Swarm Father, a moon-sized mass of tangled machinery and chitin, its heart a pulsing blue-green void. Tyrannus, Prime lit its skies with flak fire and desperation. It wasn't enough. Then the Terrans struck. The UNS Vigil moved first, flanked by the Ashborn and Bastion, their arrival shattering the darkness like God stepping into a battlefield. Railguns the length of cities ripped into Devourer carriers, each blast carving craters into the hive-armored hulls. Terran Valkyrie, units, sleek, fast, deadly, deployed by the hundreds. Soldiers descended in controlled falls, burning through the atmosphere in kinetic drops that split the sky like thunder. They fought in silence. No war cries, no chants. Only execution. Each Terran squad moved with surgical precision, weaving between Devourer spires, cutting through hive tunnels, planting charges that detonated with white-hot nuclear intensity. But even as the Devourers fell, they adapted. Spikes grew from their limbs, armor restructured mid-battle. Dead Concord soldiers rose, twisted into mockeries of their former selves, shrieking with static voices. In orbit, the Swarm Father began to unfold. It wasn't a ship, it was a birthing node. Thousands of fresh constructs poured forth, spindly, shrieking, fast. So fast the Concord fleets couldn't track them. They struck civilian shuttles, orbital stations, even Terran ships. The UNS Deliverance took the brunt. Its captain, bleeding from a stomach wound, locked its core and drove it straight into the Swarm Father's heart. detonating in a blast visible from the planet's surface. For a moment, the tide halted. Smoke, fire, silence, and then the screaming resumed. On the ground, Vexil Arun stood beside a Terran drop commander, half his body wrapped in reactive armor, face hidden behind a visor shaped like an old knight's helm. "This is what it took," Vexil whispered, voice broken. The Terran didn't look at him. He was watching the sky. "No," the commander said. "This is what happens when you forget what monsters are real." Above, as another Devourer fleet entered system range, the stars themselves seemed to dim. Kryptos spoke softly to Commander Kane. Multiple nodes converging. "This is a mass awakening." "How many?" A pause. "All of them." Alice Kane stared at the void and exhaled. Then, over every open channel, she sent one final message. "This is not the end. This is the moment we hold the line. For Earth. For every world that fell, and for the ones who still believe we're just myths, let them see us. Let them see what it means to be human." And with that, the Terran fleet charged. The stars cried. And the galaxy, for the first time in an age, fought back. For 3 days and nights, the sky above Tyrannus Prime became a graveyard of fire. Terran dreadnoughts dueled with Devourer superstructures in orbits scarred by ion storms and debris fields. Plasma and coil fire lanced across the void, detonating, in blooms of blue and red. Below, the planet's surface cracked with shock waves from atmospheric detonations, while drop squads fought street by street in a dance of fire and ruin. Every moment was bought with blood. Terran soldiers, some born centuries ago and kept alive in cryostasis, moved with inhuman discipline. Where conquered defenders fell, Terran squads took their place without hesitation, their armor burned and torn but their resolve unshaken. In the catacombs beneath the capital, Vexil Arun led a final evacuation column, his sidearm smoking, his robes tattered. Children huddled in blast corridors while civilians sobbed beneath the rumble of orbital bombardment. "Why do they fight like this?" a boy asked him. Vexil turned, searching for the answer in the fire and ash. And then a shape dropped from the ceiling, humanoid plated in white armor with blue-lit eyes. A Terran medic knelt beside them, pressing an injector to a wounded Concord nurse without asking. "We don't fight," she said softly. "We end wars." In high orbit, the Swarm Father writhed in its death throes. The UNS Vigil, half its hull melted, hung nose to nose with the massive Devourer node. Inside the bridge, Alice Kane stood with blood trailing down her temple, one arm braced in a field splint. Kryptos flickered beside her, his avatar cracked with interference. "Main cannon offline. Auxiliary power at 9%, the AI reported. "Is the core charge in position?" "Confirmed. Detonation at this proximity will destroy both vessels, and us." Kane looked down at Earth's old banner, stitched into her sleeve, faded but intact. She touched it once, then nodded. "Execute." Kryptos paused, not out of hesitation, but respect. "Goodbye, Commander." Then, with a flicker of final purpose, the Vigil fired its last forbidden weapon. A gravity-locked antimatter lance drove into the Swarm Father's heart. The creature screamed, not with sound, but with a frequency that cracked satellites and glass across 3 moons. Its armor buckled, its limbs curled inward, and in a final convulsion of stolen biomass and perverted circuitry, it exploded. The light of its death was so bright, it cast shadows on planets halfway across the sector. Silence followed. Then static. Then, slowly, cheering. From mining colonies in the rim to the tower cities of conquered Prime, voices rose, cries of disbelief, then joy, then awe. Entire cultures that had once dismissed humanity as fairy tales now hailed them as saviors. Across 1,000 channels, one phrase emerged over and over again. The Terrans stood, and the dark broke against them. Days later, Vexil stood at the edge of a scorched crater on Tyrannus Prime, staring at the grave marker driven into the earth. It was simple, made of steel, not stone. the words carved by hand. Here lies the vigil. The last light before the dark. Wasn't alone. All across the system, Concord and Terran personnel worked side by side, rebuilding, salvaging, learning. Terran tech was no longer feared. It was shared. Admiral Bakar, scarred but unbroken, stood beside Vexel and lit a quiet flame from a steel-plated lighter. Kane would have hated this ceremony crap, he said. She'd also want you to give the speech, Vexel replied. Bakar exhaled. Damn right. And he did. He spoke not of victory but of cost, of the forgotten, of the old wars and why they mattered, and of a future where humanity was no longer a ghost, but a guardian. In time, the scars faded. The devourers were not gone, not entirely, but they were scattered, driven back to the edges of the stars. Now the galaxy knew they could be fought. Stopped. Terran war academies were opened to Concord recruits. The first joint fleets were launched under banners that had never flown together before. A new charter was signed on the ruins of Tyrannus, binding all peoples, all species to one truth. Survival is not a gift. It is earned, together. And still deep in the void, some whispered of what humanity had become. Not conquerors, not myths, but a warning. Vexil, older now, sat beside a Concord child on a green world once bombarded by hive fire. Is it true? The child asked. Were they really gone? Yes, Vexil said. But they came back. Why? Vexil smiled faintly, watching Terran ships soar overhead. Because when the galaxy cried out, even from the edge of extinction, humanity answered with fire.